My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Growing up in the 1950s, my grandfather would share with me an old myth that when we are born, an angel presses our upper lip and says, "Shh, don't tell." This leaves us with the philtrum, the depression on the upper lip, and some say a loss of memory that we are spiritual beings incarnate. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Jacob Cooper, had a near-death experience at age 3 and remembered. Jacob Cooper is a clinical social worker, therapist, Reiki master, and certified hypnotherapist. His website is jacoblcooper.com, and he joins me this week to share his path of discovery and best-selling book, Life After Breath: How a Brush with Fatality Gave Me a Glimpse of Immortality. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Jake Cooper. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you so much for having me, Victor. Really appreciate it.
Jake, please share with our listeners what happened to you when you were 3 and how it shaped your understanding of both life and death.
Good question. I had something called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough. Although when I went to the park, that day in the playground, I wasn't formally diagnosed with it, or the parents didn't know that. And so I went to the park and, literally as a result of whooping cough, I tried to climb up onto a slide and my breathing became resuscitated. Then eventually, up on the ladder, on the top of it, I began to just suffocate. And after suffocation, all parts of my body, began to shut down one at a time. And then the last part that I was aware of was, my own brain. And I was able to be in the disembodied state and have a lot more awareness of my own, body and the different parts of it. And being in my brain, I was able to feel it and take a look at it. And I just saw that due to the deprivation of oxygen, my brain literally just snapped in half, as if you have a plug plugged into the wall. The wall is your body, and then you just take the plug out. And then all of a sudden, once my brain felt like it cracked in half, that's when God and the spirit realm came in. And I had a lot of the classical near-death experience, phenomenons that Raymond Moody really highlights in his book, Life After Life. But, some of those were, the tunnel, encountering, my own spirit guides, encountering angels, loved ones, awareness of what I could best describe as God, and, a Christ consciousness, and known as well as understanding my own soul family and life's purpose, and as well as, what I would be doing within this lifetime. And so the experience really allowed myself to remember who I was while I was here and what I could do within this lifetime. And it just was very profound. And I know Life After Breath, I highlighted a bit more, but the reason why I use the term life after breath is breath is life, life is breath. But from having the breath of my body being taken away from me, I was able to remember the breath of eternity that I was. And that was something that, can never take from me. But the process of dying, actually suffocating, was quite traumatic, which is why I do believe I'm able to hold on to the experience from the intensified trauma of what happened to me. But death to me is such a small transition. It's such a small dial from this realm to the, next. And who you are just goes on. You just change form, change shape to a heightened sense of awareness and capacity to feel at home and to feel back into your essence of your dwelling.
Did that near-death experience change your parents' or your family's relationship to you?
Well, more so changed my dynamic to my parents. If you look at, some of the near-death experience researchers, I'm in I guess, a different category than most. I mean, most of them, like Eben Alexander, Anita Morjani, all these people have the midlife, in their adult life. And for me, kind of like Dr. Bernie Siegel, who also endorsed my book, I had mine during my infancy and childhood. And so this was something that I didn't go around shouting at the rooftops when I had it. It's something that I very much kept close to my heart for around 2 decades. And so, more so for me, having this experience, that pedestal that I had in my parents, or that all knowingness that I had in them, was taken away. I was taken out of the blinders of this human programming, and I was a lot more aware that my parents biologically created me. I was really tied into them, but they didn't make who I was. They didn't own who I was. I recognized that, it was all kind of like a play, or just kind of like an act, this life. Um, and so that led to a lot of defiance, as a kid, and a lot of frustration that, came from the reality that they subscribed to and fully bought into, and the reality that I saw through. And that was a very difficult position that I wasn't really able to put into words. But they were very grounded left brain intellectuals. They valued academia, all those things. And I didn't really buy into the world that they had 2 feet into.
I've interviewed many people who've had near-death experiences, including some of the ones that you mentioned, Eben Alexander and Robert Kopechne and Anita Morjani. Some share what might be called a life review, or a series of life-changing lessons that they bring back with them. Now, at 3 years of age in this lifetime, there was very little for you to review, or was there?
More so, yes, within this lifetime, there was an awareness. I was still also connected to the body, the personality that I was. I mean, part of my near-death experience was the curiosity of the story that I started, and wondering how this story would unfold if I continued. How would I look? What would I do in my life? And just part of feeling like this unfinished answer that I wanted to figure out, if I were to stay. But, people talk about life review. I had a life review, but my life reviews also transcended this particular lifetime, where I had other carnations, in reviews of those lifetimes. And so that's not something that I necessarily hear about all the time. And it's something that I experienced. And those life reviews allowed a greater universality and understanding, awareness that I was more than just my personality in this body, that I was in many ways the sum totality of tons of lifetimes. But the most striking life review that I had was my last carnation, in which I was a teacher and I had a lot of students, and I had kind of like a hubris, or just the what hit the fan, and I took my own life. And I just remembered, that moment, and it was a moment in which I wasn't ever judged. I returned back to, love, but it also was a moment that I was aware that, had I continued, that it would have been fine, whatever I felt trapped into. But I had, a strong emotional reaction to the students that I was able to see within my near-death experience. And I understood the ties between the last lifetime, in which, I took my own body. I don't want to say life because we're eternal, but and the near-death experience, and how, really the NDE and the work that I did within this lifetime spoke to my karma and dharma of that suicide that I had.
Is the brain a temporary residence for eternal consciousness?
Absolutely. And, that's one thing that science and medicine really can't fully answer. If you listen to any of the researchers, Dr. Bruce Grayson, or, Moody or any of these people, they'll tell you, from terminal lucidity, to these near-death experiences, even these out-of-body experiences where your brain is fully captioned, fully functioning, and you're having these incredible expanded awarenesses, and you're joining your loved ones when they die. But at the very least, when someone's taken a hallucinogenic, for instance, their brainwave activity and functioning actually decreases. So why is it that consciousness insurmountably expands when brainwave activity decreases? So there's a lot of questions, but I like what Bruce Grayson and other near-death experiences researchers will tell you, that near-death, all these experiences put a different category of the brain and the mind, where in our, the Western scientific paradigm, the brain and the mind are synonymous in many ways.
Bringing together your initial experience and what you've learned through life and working with others, how would you define our pure essence or the soul?
The pure essence or the soul is to me, beyond thought, beyond ego, beyond the personality. It is that deep, expanded, joyful part of you beyond your story, beyond this lifetime. And the soul is not defined by this lifetime. It experiences events for its own growth within this lifetime. So I think the soul is far beyond this body, this lifetime, this cultural ideology that's been inherited. And, to me at least, it is a part of you that is forever intertwined, whether you call it divine, God, higher consciousness, whatever that is. It is the breath of eternity that you were gifted. And, and it's a beautiful part of you. Sadly, plenty of people are more tapped into their human story than their soul's essence and their soul story. And we're here to integrate our soul's essence in this human experience.
And is each lifetime like a school?
I often hear that from people like, let's say Dr. Brian Weiss and, a lot of teachers. And I think it's all depending on how we see it. I think that we're here to not necessarily learn anything that we don't know, because I do believe in many ways the soul is all knowing, but we're here to integrate that awareness within the blinders of the human experiences. So that knowing becomes a part of the soul's evolution, and it becomes a part of the soul's expansion.
How would you describe what has been called the afterlife?
It's interesting and it's funny. When I think of the afterlife, I think of infinite. And so when I'm trying to describe something that which is infinite, there's not a dot that I could put on and say, this is the afterlife, but that's not, this isn't, that's not. The only common denominator that I have is that it's high vibratory, comfortable place of the soul's dwelling, in the soul's home, is what I would say. And it is beyond low vibrational frequency of this physical reality. And it is inside of us and all around us. Heaven, what I experienced, the other side that I experienced, felt like millions of miles away, but it was also right here, in which, for instance, when I encountered the angels in front of me, my spirit guides, they weren't a million miles away. They were right here, overlaying this reality. So, it's kind of like a radio station. You could just gently dial it up, and it's all right here. It's just vibrating at a different frequency, but it's a higher filter right above and connected to this reality. But it also, heaven is not something outside of us, it's something within as well. And I don't believe that we're here to create heaven on earth, but that we are heaven on earth, and we're here to remember that within, our lives.
Based upon all of your experiences, what is your understanding of what we call angels and other spiritual guides?
I can only speak from my own direct experiences, but, when I encountered angels, the angels that I at least connected to had different, kind of levels or gears. I'm able to group them all as in one category, but there are specific categories of them, such as transformative experiences. To me, they're all the same in a way. The near-death experience, spiritual transformative experience, all that stuff. It's just another form of higher consciousness expressed itself differently. So to me, angels, I view the same, but also there's different characteristics. I view spiritual guides or guardian angels as more micro focused, they're more contracted to the individual soul. There's more of an intimate connection with that relationship, and there's more of a groundedness and a human component and quality to those spirit guides. I do believe that many spirit guides have lived here before, have had human experiences, whereas the angelic realm outside of my spirit guides that I connected to was a lot more uniformity and a lot more macro focused and a lot less individualistic in their presentation and just identity, and it was just more of like a uniformal minion of God, if you will. But it's so they have different gears of connectivity and different ways to support us, but I would say spirit guides are more connected to the soul and angels are more connected to the macro and the planet, and life here, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I had a very interesting experience. I did not have angelic knowledge or angelic connection that I sensed. And then in the late 1980s, I got called into Reiki. And in the very first Reiki class, the Reiki master, the teacher of that class, suggested that we go inside and look for something or see if we sense something or feel something or hear something. And as soon as I did that, I saw in my mind's eye what I would consider to be some type of an angelic energy. And I said, I think I see an angel. And he said, ask the angel its name. And immediately, without asking, obviously, I heard Gabriel. That evening, I got home, and my daughter, who was 12 at the time, I asked her if she wanted to experience Reiki. And I started using Reiki with her. And she said, Daddy, she said, I see all of our deceased relatives in a line, and there's an angel floating above them. And I said, what's the angel's name? And she said, Gabriel. And so that
Wow.
connection, that familial connection, for whatever reason that was, really touched me in a way that I had never comprehended before. So that was a very special and loving experience for me to share that with her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's many different levels of angels. Like I said, there's even the archangels. And for them, they have specific names: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, all that stuff. For me, I connected more so, it was almost kind of like a childlike, cherub kind of thing, in that realm that I connected to. But the craziest part was we could think it telepathically, or we could see it clairaudiently or feel it, all that stuff. But to me, this was right directly in front of me, this realm, and it was an endless realm of angels floating right in front of me, as if it was like a physical reality, but a lot more intensified and a lot more vibratory. And just right above this reality is heaven, is like a thin veil right above here, and you could see it right within your mind's eye, as if you're looking at someone. So it was really cool.
Kind of like in The Wizard of Oz, when the house lands in Oz and it goes from black and white to technicolor. Beautiful.
Right. And that's a common phenomenon. Many of the reasons why it kept this so quiet is words are more so for other people to really hear. But from a near-death experiencer's perspective, having to explain this and putting all this stuff in the point of a pen in this heightened energy is not easy. To just explain this realm far beyond this one and far different in many ways is not easy. But and some of the colors, the sounds, the language is like another planet in many ways, but it's right here too. It's just very different, if that makes sense. And why I say different is, here we're really, at least in the Western world, if we do something, we're loved. If we don't do something, we're not loved. So there's a conditional transactionalism of love, where on the other side, you're not loved for what you necessarily do, but you're loved for who you are. And that is much different. And you're looked up upon and seen as you truly are in an expanded way versus, here we come here in a very disempowered way from a very young age, in a sense that we are these timeless beings, but yet we're looked at as if we are synonymous with our chronological age of the body. And having this experience at the age of 3, I could attest that the body doesn't produce who we are. It rather just temporarily stores the infinite soul.
We have another minute in the segment. I just want to touch on something with you, and that's spiritual guides. I've been blessed throughout my life with clairaudience and hearing messages, especially messages that were important or critical at a specific point in time. Quick example, when I was driving on a highway a few years ago, I was in the left-hand lane and the traffic was moving at the speed limit, and a voice said, "Get out of this lane now." And I always listen to that voice when I hear it, because I can differentiate between something that my ego is saying and something that spirit is saying. I got out of that lane, and within 5 seconds, there was a multi-car accident in the lane that I was in. And had I not listened to the voice, I would have been involved in that accident. Do you engage in experiences like that also?
I think we all have. Not everyone is able to be aware of it, but we all have. Absolutely. Intuition is indeed the language of our soul and the GPS of our lives. And it's there. The question is, we do have free will, and do we act and flow with a greater intelligence far more than our own, or do we have our own blinders on, and block out that awareness to always listen, to some of our fears or limited awareness? And I think that's important to live a guided life, is learning how to decipher the voice of our own mind or fantasy versus the voice of guidance and intuition.
Absolutely. My guest is Jacob Cooper. His book is called Life After Breath, How a Brush with Fatality Gave Me a Glimpse of Immortality. Jake, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your work.
Yes, my book is available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon. And if you are interested in purchasing it through other sources, you could go on my website at jacoblcooper.com, and you could just click on my book, and there you could also find a list of different service offerings that I provide.
And we'll be back with more of Jake after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Jacob Cooper, is the author of the book, Life After Breath, How a Brush with Fatality Gave Me a Glimpse of Immortality. Jake, at this time of year, in addition to celebrating holidays, many grieve the loss of loved ones no longer physically present to share in the celebration. What would you say to them?
I would say the biggest celebration that we could have in this lifetime is to honor ourselves, where our feet are at, our emotions. And there's nothing more antithetical to celebration than to doing something or being forced to do something that isn't in congruence with how you're feeling. And I think the hard part is the holidays portray a one-size-fits-all, kind of forced sense of jubilation during this time. And for many, that's not the case. They're in a different boat, a unique boat, and they're not, ready to really have that full-blown experience. So knowing that it's okay or not okay to celebrate and to feel how you feel. I think what's important, though, is when you are going through a difficult time, is to have a game plan set in advance. I think the holidays itself for many are the easy part. It's the anticipatory time of the entire month of December, right after Thanksgiving, that could be the most difficult. So having an active plan and a way also to create a memory of the loved one and a new tradition your own way, as well as communication within your own loved ones and having them aware of what you're feeling, what you're going through is important, because many times we assume that people know exactly how we feel or that stuff like that. And then things get taken out of context. But, for many, I think the goal is to find ways to understand in their own ways that an empty chair does not always mean or have to mean an empty presence, and learning how if we continue to incorporate that person, the holiday, or find ways to have meaning of their life, then there's an eternal existence of that individual within this lifetime, but it's a different kind of form. So finding new traditions to create memory and to create meaning is a great pathway, and support system for those going through acute grief during this time.
Many are also grieving what they sense as a loss of normalcy and stability with the continuing pandemic and a world that is filled with uncertainty. What words of comfort would you offer them?
Yeah. It's, I find a lot of parallels within my near-death experience that I had on an individual basis and what I view right now, which is a global near-death experience. And why I say that and why I really chose the title Life After Breath is, it feels like on a macro perspective as if the oxygen of life or, that plug has just been pulled and we're in a place of just such uncertainty. And what was a saving grace for myself when I was suffocated was to be able to surrender, was be able to entrust and connect through a knowing of a higher intelligence, a higher awareness, and that allowed me to continue life. And I think what's important is for people to learn how to connect on an inner basis when there's outer deprivation of life force or outer uncertainty. I love what Wayne Dyer would say, where we have to look at our lives and be aware of the position that we are living in. If we're facing in the wrong direction and living life from the outside in, then we become a product of every event that happens in our life, and our life becomes taken out of hands and we become victimized. Whereas if we turn and change the direction that we're facing in our life to inward, we're able to engage differently through wisdom, through mindfulness, through guidance and empathy when those times are very challenging. But I think the important part is to learn a good foundation so that we could handle this time with grace, with empathy, with a sense of meaning, and a hunger to really transform pain into a greater sense of purpose. But the difficult part about this, and even from my vantage point, is that it's a similar storm, but everyone's in their own unique boat. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all situation where there's a one answer. But I think it's important for people to be able to meet themselves from the ground up of where their feet are at and what they're experiencing, and being able to navigate this, but also to not do it alone, and really being able to utilize the proper services from the ground up during this time.
During the break, we were talking offline about some experiences that we've shared. And when I mentioned to you that when I was 7, I was in my room one day and was reading a book, and I looked up and my grandfather was standing there, and I was very, very close to my paternal grandfather. And I said, "Grandpa, when did you come in?" And he just smiled. And then all of a sudden he sort of disappeared. I went into the living room and said to my parents, "Grandpa was just here." And they said, "Oh, you're imagining things." I was labeled one of these kids with an overactive imagination. And within a couple of minutes, the phone rang with word of my grandfather's passing. And you said that someone else shared that experience recently.
Yeah, no, it's just so funny because I never really followed Tyler Henry. I have a lot of respect for him, the Hollywood medium, but for some odd reason, I listened to one of his interviews with Larry King, I think, a year ago, a year or two ago, right before Larry passed. And I mean, Larry was really coming after Tyler, with his style, but Tyler was really handling each question with grace. And, there's nothing, that Larry tried to ask that Tyler couldn't properly handle. But one of those, points that he made was when he first, I think, woke up around the age of 10 years old or something like that. And one of his grandparents came to him, and he just had an awareness, that the grandparent was going to pass away. And he told his parents. Within minutes later, he found out, like you were saying, that the grandparent passed. And so you can make an argument that, his grandparent was sick, or maybe yours was sick, or they were old, or whatever. But to do that in a nanosecond or minutes later, right when they were about to pass, out of any moment in time, there's something just so much more to that. And so I do believe within this lifetime, love never ends. And the love that we have and our connection to our loved ones is so profound. And we just have such awareness where people speak of intuition, like a maternal kind of energy, but it's something that, is the language of the soul and connects us, to our loved ones in a deep level.
Do we travel in soul families?
I experienced that in my near-death experience, that there are soul families, and I will share one story that I, chronicled in Life After Breath, where I had an aunt who, much like one of your grandparents, was a guide to me in this lifetime. And when she was about to depart her body, she was having a lot of terminal lucidity and, conversations with her soul family and her grandparents, which was, it's common, for people to see that in hospice centers. And she was mentioning the hands that were reaching out to her, during her last conversations. But one of her last messages to me was, if you look at a picture and you look at, individuals within that picture, they look different. But if you look at the eyes within that family picture, not all family members, but a lot of the family members, there's something very profound that connects each member within that picture and, beneath the eyes. And at the time, I'm like, all right, that's a cool lesson. A year or two later, a medium who I just know passed away, actually around a year ago today, said she really was making interdimensional connection and spirit contact with my aunt. And she said, why does she keep on telling me the word picture? That means something to you. What's that? And I just knew that was an affirmation of her lesson regarding the depth of connectivity of the soul family members. So it was a very profound message.
That's beautiful. I'm glad you had that experience. Thank you for sharing that. You were born into an Orthodox Jewish family, and through your experience, emerged with what you called Christ consciousness. Do you find these mutually exclusive or inclusive?
Depends on who you're turning to and who you're asking. I mean, within the, many of the Orthodox faiths that I grew up in, Christ was certainly not someone, who was endorsed or embraced, but he's probably a lot more Jewish than I am, being born in Israel. And he was like a socialistic, reform rabbi and, very advanced. And, but I would say that the Christ that I connected to is different than some near-death experiencers who exactly see Christ run in front of them. And why I say that is there's a personality that we connect to. There's a personality within lifetimes that we have. But then behind that personality is a consciousness, is beyond that lifetime. And, even Christ himself, kind of spoke about, different, lifetimes that, he lived, or, and people connect to some of the lifetimes that he might have had or those around him had. But I think the Council of Constantine might have removed some of the reincarnation, teachings of that. But what I say is, we have personalities that we go through, in different lifetimes, but beyond that is a consciousness, is a ray of the divinity. And, so that's kind of what I connected to, was beyond the personality, beyond the physical portrayal of Christ within that lifetime, was an eternal consciousness beyond the filter of personality, beyond the filter of that. And I think loved ones come through us through ways in which we know them, and there's personalities that they take. But behind that personalities that they take of lifetimes is a consciousness, is something even higher, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. What is your understanding of the divine, of God, and how has that manifested in your life?
Well, I would say it's an energy far greater than anything that we could comprehend, in a sense that it's unconditional love to the fullest, but also it's not something outside of ourselves. It is who we are and what we're infinitely connected to. We are infinitely connected to divinity. We have the infinity of divinity inside of us and all around us. My experience with God and my near-death experience was this endless climactical experience, as if you're looking at going to this endless climax of energy that had no end and almost the center point of creation. And so it's kind of like you have a roof over your head and imagine traveling upwards, 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 where there's no end, to where you're heading. And it's just this eternal light of awareness, light of wisdom, and light of power. And yet God is in all things. So that was one way of portraying it, but God presents itself subjectively to us on a different basis. But also there's a streamline of communication within our lifetimes that we go through at every moment. And so God is not a limited thing that you could point to. It is in all things, but is a center point of creation and the ultimate endless apex of reality of which we know it.
I understand. Thank you for sharing that. One of the blessings in my life was being called through a number of synchronicities to an organization called the New Seminary back in the 1990s. It was the first interfaith seminary in the United States. It was founded by Rabbi Joseph Gelberman, Swami Satchidananda, and a number of other interfaith luminaries. And Rabbi Gelberman's teaching, one of his major teachings was an ancient Hebrew expression, hakol beseda. You know what that means, right?
All is in order, yeah.
All is in order. But he took it one step further. He said, everything is unfolding in divine order, that we may not see it when it happens, that we may not understand, that we may detest things that are happening around us. But if we take a step back and look at the big picture, the overall picture, we see that there's a greater purpose taking place. Do you believe that?
I don't believe, which is funny. Raymond Moody, Dr. Raymond Moody, who endorsed my book, I think someone once asked him, do you believe in the afterlife? And he goes, no. And that was the whole article. But then they forget that he went on to explain, I don't believe, I have a knowing.
That's right, a knowing.
So there's a big difference where belief is something that you're holding on to kind of fit a set desired of outcome or expectation, whereas a knowing is something that you have no doubt or conviction within, with all conviction in every file of your being. It's funny when you say Hakol Beseder, because when I hear that term, I'm used to saying Cain. It's normally a question that's asked for you. Hakol Beseder, is everything okay? And then you say Cain, you say yes. When my experience, my near-death experience, I experienced a firm awareness of being in eternity, being in an infinite time, a timeless time. And within that period, there was an awareness of all is well, was well, will be well. And that's not something that we are ever accustomed to living here on earth, because we're always, especially these days, used to something around the corner on the outside. And I think from a broader perspective, from a soul's perspective, that couldn't be further from the truth, in a sense that, yes, within life, we could have, hurricanes and turbulence. Those are experiences. But at the end of the day, all those go back to the nothingness of which we originated. And we come back to a place where all is well, was well, will be well. How could it not when you're connected to an infinite energy of the divine, far greater than any form of pain, where unconditional love, jubilation, and pure awareness is all that there is, was, will be, and everything else is just an experience, but doesn't constitute as reality that represents the language and the nature of our inner being.
And as you said, as Raymond Moody said, I don't believe I know. I've experienced that concept of Hakol V'Seder, that everything unfolding in divine order. And when I look back in my life, I recognized it after that. I learned that teaching from him. And I've been grounded in that ever since. That was in the 1990s. I've been grounded in that. And every experience that I've had since that time is an expression of that unfolding of divine order. And I'm grateful for his teaching and for his blessing.
Yeah, and the Course in Miracles teaches about sovereignty, which is, the ability, the Course in Miracles, is a wonderful book. I really recommend people reading it. But, it's the ability to transform or reframe life's events as we know it to having a degree of wisdom and having a degree of a knowingness of what we're going through as in all that there is and the ability to see through it. But I think the important part is when we're not able to see, the event or are struggling with the event is the ability to ask, how could I see this another way? How could I transform and create a miracle in my ability to transform a tragedy into awareness, a tragedy into meaning, which is, very synonymous with many of the spiritual teachers. St. Francis of Assisi's, prayer as well too highlights this, but, we are transformational beings, and death is the most transformational, act that we could do, but in a way we could have deaths without needing to lose our body. And that is the ability to let go of how we view the world or view events and to be able to surrender to a greater intelligence.
And in doing so, we remove fear and we have total understanding. My guest, Jacob Cooper, his book, Life After Breath, How a Brush with Fatality Gave Me a Glimpse of Immortality. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Asked what kind of family she wanted. She said, a family like yours.
Learn more about adopting a teen at adoptuskids.org. You can't imagine the reward. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Jacob Cooper. He's the author of the book, Life After Breath, How a Brush with Fatality Gave Me a Glimpse of Immortality. Jake, this show is predicated on the crossroads of science and spirituality. And you said there are many great scientists who actually have said very profound spiritual things.
Yeah, I think the most brilliant man, in modern day history, Albert Einstein, you listen to him, he sounds more closer to Jesus than he does a scientist in many ways with some of his innovative teachings or like a philosopher. But he said the most important question that we could have within our lifetimes, is the universe a place that is working with us or against us? And I'm paraphrasing, that, but so I think that's a pivotal area to really check where our life is coming from. Is it coming from a place of lack of trust, scarcity, or is it a trusting in the ultimate abundance is not something that's outside of us, but rather inside of us, all around us, and something that we are forever connected to, despite the deprivation of outer forces of life that could happen and that we're experiencing within, many of these last couple of years.
Absolutely. In your book, you share something about your formative years that resonated with me, about feeling like an outsider. What was that like? And what would you offer to parents of children who are also having that experience?
Yeah, I mean, suffocation of my body as a result of whooping cough didn't limit itself to that moment. I would say suffocation for myself lasted more than a decade or two. And why I say that is, I had this experience at such a young age, but there was a knowing, and as well as based off of direct experience, which I, chronicle in my book, that people forgot about this. And that to me was the most lonely feeling that I could have. And to me, suffocation, the hardest part about it was being disconnected from everything and everyone around you and just being in this place of loneliness and suffering. And to me, loneliness is at the crux of all suffering when you're feeling very isolated. And it wasn't until that I had universality of my near-death experience from reading a book actually gifted to me called Embraced by the Light, in which, as a result of anxiety, like you were saying before, I got into yoga practices and I started getting back into things, that I had a universal language for my experience that was so sacred and yet a double-edged sword that was so lonely that I didn't even bother explaining myself because I thought that the world would not understand or would not understand me. And so it was a safer position to keep it very, close to myself. But reading Betty's book, Embraced by Light, which was a New York Times bestseller, and she was on Oprah, gave me universality for other people who had this experience as well as a language. And so I think it's very important for parents in general to understand that your child does not come from you, comes through you, but is a timeless soul. And on a very deep level, I do believe it's a very big adjustment for kids who aren't kids to all of a sudden be or spoken as kids and just be, having this brand new slate, when in reality there's an old person and that person they're being spoken to as if they're totally never existed before, so on a subconscious basis, there's a lot of complexity that goes on. And just because it's not portrayed or spoken to on our outer level doesn't mean that it's not transpiring on an inner level, if that makes sense. As the majority of life isn't outwardly expressed, majority of life is subconsciously, ruled, if that makes sense.
Your experience also opened you on an intuitive level. Was this challenging for you?
Yeah, because I didn't have, again, the vernacular of near-death experience, past lives, intuition. To me, these were all these experiences that I didn't have a name for. And I knew what it was, but it almost felt annoying, in a nuisance, where I didn't go around saying, I'm the Long Island medium having these psychic John Edward experiences. It was like, this is really annoying. I, saw this happening. Now it's happening in front of me. Can I just live my life without, seeing these kind of things? And so, yeah, and even like we said, the timeline of that isn't necessarily there. I remember there was one time I was playing basketball and there was a kid who made some smart remark to me. And there was just this energy and this voice that I had telling me that this boy is going to die very young. And, just to have compassion, just to have awareness, but he's going to go soon. Sure enough, a couple of years later, I was driving to work, and right by driving to work in Long Island, there was a big, site of the crash, this crash, and the highway was closed. Sure enough, out of all streets in Long Island, I found out that it was that boy that years before I had that connection with and I had that premonition for. And I was driving on an innocent morning on a random road in Long Island on a Saturday morning. And so, I actually attended the funeral, but why I say that, it's just the timeline of things where we have this intuitive hint and we just brush it off, and then the profound connection that we have to it years later, as if it's the next moment of that premonition, is just profound.
How did your counseling practice ensue, and what do you share with your clients during your practice?
Yeah, I think clinical work is slowly evolving, but it's kind of like raising a temperature of an ocean. It takes time. This doesn't happen overnight. They're starting to integrate, Eastern practices, such as mindfulness, within it, which is great. But, in terms of actually psychotherapy, I enter clients' worlds, in many ways. And so I kind of leave that to the side. But, I work with people on different levels for my lectures, for my book, and there's a lot more autonomy and freedom. But, it's still a tight line that I have to be wary of because, there's still a stigma attached to it, and they still see that as a detriment in many ways and not as, something supportive. So that's kind of where I'm at, but hopefully, as more and more credibility and evidence comes down to it, we could use, transformative experiences, as a tool in clinical practice for clients.
If you wrote your personal mission statement, what would it say?
What's inside of you and all around you is infinitely greater than anything in front of you. By anything, I mean any challenge, any hardship. And people forget their biggest superpower of what's inside of them and all around them, to use. So I would say, don't allow life to use you. You have to use your own inner power, your own inner energy to navigate through these forces, and to entrust that you're not doing this alone, that you could surrender to a greater intelligence, which is actually the most powerful act that you can do versus using your own force, which depletes you of your own energy.
Our world seems to long for love and unity. Is this achievable?
Well, depending on what channel you're tuning into, it is, but we have to be able to break and lose ourselves in order to really find ourselves as a society. And my hope was through this pandemic that it works like a similar phenomenon to a transformative experience where there was a shake-up period, and that degree of comfort or the felt permanence of us on this planet was taken from us. And so hopefully people could look at a heightened awareness of impermanence of our time here as a way to really reflect on living a life from a greater gear of substance, purpose, meaning, unity, versus a life of trying to bring everyone down so that we could move up, or being a cog in this material game that we're living in. And so I think hopefully you will be focused on the things that we can take with us versus the things that we can't.
What would you like readers to take away from Life After Breath?
If I'm known as the afterlife guy, I'll be quite disappointed. I want people to remember when they're reading my story that this isn't my story, that this is your story, this is our story. And we all come from this, we go through this. We come into the womb, we see a light of people around us. And when we pass away, we also, when the body goes, when we have life after life, as Rain would say, we also see a similar light. And life is a one-way ticket back to home. This is just temporarily stopped. So hopefully there's a familiarity and a reflection that you see in this story that speaks to your greater soul story.
My guest, Jacob Cooper, his book, Life After Breath, How a Brush with Fatality Gave Me a Glimpse of Immortality. Jake, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Yes, my book is available, Life After Breath, on Amazon. So please check it out, share it, review it. It's a perfect, gift during this time. And my website is jacobLcooper.com. And there you could look at So my services were, you could contact me through my various different, or follow me through my various different social media platforms as well.
And what type of groups do you offer?
I offer different groups here in Long Island, such as past life regression group, mindfulness group, and I also work very closely with different organizations, in particular these days, surrounding grief and, parents who have lost kids. Closely connected to Forever Family Foundation, helping parents heal, as well as, different parent support groups who have lost kids to their, who have lost their own children, and are dealing with grief. So that's really my focus a lot these days. But, my bigger focus is on giving people, having spirituality with practicality and being able to gain tools within their lives to navigate these times.
Jake, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience and your wisdom and your message.
An honor. Thank you, Victor. I appreciate it, having me.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.